we want to show you the connection that is made from the CP3 pump back to our Y connection, so we can either measure the flow from the CP3 or plumb it into the Y and return it back to the tank. We have a short section of rubber hose here that's been removed between this shallow cap and this metal hard line where we've slid this rubber hose up on here. So what's on the other side of this banjo fitting where this yellow vinyl cap is connected, that is drilled through the fuel filter canister, and we join our returns all together into one. And what's on the other side is this rail pressure relief valve. In the event that the system is generating too much pressure, this valve would open and the fuel that remains would be sent back to the fuel tank. So common rail means more than one thing. First, it means common rail as there's a single line from the pump up to the fuel rail, and all the injectors connect to this common rail. Well, the returns do the same thing. So to do any type of testing for individual components, we need to be able to separate these returns and measure these volumes independently. So that's what we're doing here. We've separated the CP3 pump from the rest of the system, and we've also got the injector return separated from the system, so we can independently measure these amounts. We're going to show you the injector BL test, BL standing for back leak test, and what this does is it measures the return for all 6 injectors on this particular application. It's a Dodge Cummins 6-cylinder application, and it'll measure the combined flow of all 6 injectors. And we have a maximum specification for our return, and I believe this particular truck has some injector issues, so yeah, we'll probably see an overflow condition here. So as soon as our idle comes back down to 40 MPa, all right, we're going to go ahead and start our test. Reselect it here. There we go. And you'll see a time duration. Runs this test for 1 minute. And for this test, you can see that we're at 160 MPa. You can see we're way over. I think the specification for this one is 420 milliliters per minute. We're at 469. And it may drop during the test. We've got about 20 seconds remaining of this test. You need to make sure when you conduct this test that the engine is at full operating temperature. All right, and there we go. We have our test. And at the end of the test, it will take a screenshot. Let's look and see what we got on our screenshot. And we see it failed due to excessive flow. So we've got potentially, one or multiple issues here. Either all of our injectors are worn the same amount and they're just worn to the point that this flow is excessive, or we could potentially have a crossover tube or connector tube. Actually, the terminology is high pressure connector. We could have an issue with this high pressure connector contributing to this flow, but I think we've just got 300,000 mile injectors that are just worn out. So this concludes the injector BL test. Here we will show you the connections to the injector return line on the back of the fuel filter canister. This comes from the CP3 return. This is a return line that goes back to the fuel tank. As you can see, we're connected, our inlet to the flow meter coming from the CP3 or the injector return line. And we go out and we go through this T connection and back to the fuel tank up here. So once we've made this connection, it's very easy once we have done the injector back leak test to switch this line with this line and do a CP3 loss test. All right, we're going to show you the CP3 loss test. We're going to select our test, CP3 loss, and we're going to start it. Now, we went from, let's go back and look at our screenshot here. We got a pass here. We went from 53 to 56. And that's within our specification. What we're looking for here is the minimum deviation between our initial flow test and essentially what it'll do, it'll start the flow test, and for a certain amount of time, it'll be sampling what the flow meter is putting out. And once it gets all its samples, then it'll initiate the test, and it's looking for the difference between the initial and the end of the test. This one passed. This one was 3 liters per hour in excess on the second test. All right, now we're going to show you an injector test, which is called SOI, which means start of injection. We're going to select the test, press start. We're looking for a minimum value of between 14 and 20 MPa. As you can see, idle MPa is dropping. If you look in the center of the screen, injection start point MPa, and it keeps dropping. The engine should be cutting off right now if these injectors were calibrated as they should be. You see the idle is getting difficult. All right, and it gets down to 6 before it dies. It shouldn't get below 14. Or shouldn't be able to get below 14 without, starting to run extremely rough and then the engine dying pretty soon thereafter. What we're doing here is we're measuring when the injection event begins at the lowest point. And as you can see, we've gone back and this is our screenshot. And as you see, SOI below specification, test complete. So this is essentially what you're getting when you do a balance rate test, like on your Duramaxes, or you do a contribution test on your Cummins platforms. And it's kind of misleading because a lot of people think that their injectors are bad just because they fail on this test here. But this is really an indication of an injector that if it did pass the back leak test, you could recalibrate these things and put them right back into use, and they would be just as good as they were to begin with. So what happens here, there's a spring down next to the nozzle, which holds the pintle closed, and it's shimmed. So the pressure, as the shim is thicker, the pressure increases on the pintle of the nozzle holding it closed. So what we're looking for is the minimum amount of pressure it takes to lift the pintle off of its seat to let fuel start flowing out the orifice discharge holes in the end of the injector nozzle. So, and like I said, if it's too low, we can simply shim these injectors and get them back in service. There's thousands of injectors that get replaced every year, simply due to this issue here, and it should be a service that's being offered by fuel injection shops. And essentially what they're doing when you send your injectors back to them, now we can't say all of them are doing this, but I know for a fact there are many that do, you know, what I'm going to explain to you here. They'll take these injectors. If they pass the return flow test, they'll recalibrate them and sell them back to you. And, you know, a lot of them without even putting hard parts in them. So you may be a victim of this, and we're not going to say they're bad injectors. You know, if they recalibrate them and they're back within specification, you know, that we can't call it good or bad, but it's kind of misleading to the consumer. They're buying something saying it's a rebuilt injector. And, you know, we hear, you know, terminology associated with these also being called recertified injectors. That's pretty misleading too. I don't know why they don't just call it a recalibrated injector if that's what it is, or a good used injector that passed all the testing, and then sell it accordingly. So the market today is full of, you know, a plethora of all different you know, scenarios based upon injectors. Some of them just being good used injectors that are being cleaned up. Some of them being bad used injectors that you're buying. So the whole effort here with this Common Rail EZ test is to empower you, the shop, or you, the consumer, you know, depending on who buys this tool, so you know what you've got, and even if you replace the parts, you know what you've put in there. So with all the different tests we can do, we can find the exact problem, and we can also determine whether or not the parts that we've replaced are good as well.